Okay, like Carrie said, I have to open this up here so that I have my, maybe. There we go. So we're going to be talking about the gut microbiome today. And normally, do I need to? Okay. I'm not sure I am on. Have to push the button.
Yeah, you are.
I am?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Normally, I have a little slide in here about what lifestyle medicine is, and I don't have that in here today, so I'm just going to talk to you briefly about what lifestyle medicine is. So lifestyle medicine is really the use of lifestyle behaviors in order to prevent and actually reverse chronic disease. So what we know is that 80% of the chronic diseases that people suffer from in this country, so diabetes, obesity, type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease in particular, those three, plus about half of all cancers, are lifestyle related. And the biggest impact, or the biggest factor, is diet, okay? So in lifestyle medicine, we have kind of a pyramid, and what we do is we focus on non-drug and non-surgical modalities first. So diet, exercise, sleep management, stress management, and then we go to up the chain where we don't exclude pharmaceuticals and we don't exclude surgery, but we use those as last resort rather than as first-line therapy. So the gut microbiome. So there are about 32,000. The Human Genome Project mapped about 32,000 genes in the human body. Okay. But we have about somewhere between 10 and 100 trillion microorganisms in our guts. And these are made up of over 1,000 different bacterial species. So we can actually, the microbiome is actually considered its own organ. Okay? It's just like the heart or the liver or the intestinal tract itself. It is its actual own organ. And we have evolved, just every animal and every plant has evolved with microorganisms. And we rely on them for our health and safety and well-being. So we can actually think about humans as being superorganisms, which are a human and microbiome, microbiota synergy hybrid. And we used to think that the womb was sterile. Okay, we used to think that it was all free of bacteria and things like that. But our microbiome actually starts to form when we are in utero. So there is actually a placental microbiome that is made up of primarily the oral microbiota of the mother. Okay, and then the second introduction to the microbiome or to colonization of our own guts is during birth, and then during breastfeeding. So what we know is that, and these, our gut microbiome is largely completed forming by the end of the second year of life. So children that are born by C-section and their mothers never labor, or children who aren't breastfed, or children who receive antibiotics during their first 6 months of life, are predisposed to allergies and asthma and obesity and some other things because they don't get proper colonization of their gut microbiome. And so the health of the human body, or the health of the human, actually depends upon this balance between what we call symbionts and pathobionts. So symbionts are beneficial gut bacteria, and pathobionts are the bad ones. And all humans, all American humans, primarily fit into two gut enterotypes. Okay, so we have the Prevotella and the Bacteroides. So a Prevotella enterotype is primarily associated with plant foods, so high carbohydrate diets. Bacteroides is primarily associated with animal food diets that are high in saturated fat and those kinds of things. And what we know is that this Bacteroides enterotype in these animal foods tend to lead toward more pathobionts. And we also know that diet-driven changes can actually occur very rapidly within days to weeks. So somebody who has and this is an evolutionary thing because, as you think back to when we were hunter-gatherer type people, they largely gathered, right? And so their guts had to be able to process the plant foods. But then they would have hunting, intermittent hunting, right? And so they would eat large amounts of meat during those time periods right after a hunt. But they had no way to store the meat per se, so it was hit and miss. So the gut had to be able to rapidly change, the enterotype in order to accommodate the digestion of that meat. And so that can actually happen within a day. It happens very rapidly. So then in reverse, then it can happen very rapidly that it can go back the other direction. And again, the Prevotella enterotype is primarily associated with carbohydrate consumption. And there are these things called macrobiotic accessible carbohydrates. And these macrobiotic accessible carbohydrates are what fuel and feed these symbionts, these Prevotella, these healthy types of bacteria. The MACs, the microbiota accessible carbohydrates, are the ones that actually reach the large intestine. Okay, so we have a lot of mono and disaccharides, so like sugars, like those quickly absorbed sugars that are absorbed in the small intestine and don't ever get down into the large intestine to feed these bacteria. But we also have polysaccharides like starch that oftentimes do also get absorbed in the small intestine, but can actually reach the large intestine if it becomes what we call resistant starch. And resistant starch happens when if you consume something that is certain foods like berries and beans and nuts, if those are consumed at the same time as the starch is consumed, it actually turns those polysaccharides into resistant starch, and they're allowed to progress into the large intestine to feed those healthy bacteria. And then the MACs themselves are largely what we would call fiber or prebiotics. So fiber gets down into the large intestine. It's able to be acted upon by the bacteria there. And so those are really the ones that we're focused on. We all know that fiber, does anybody know how much fiber we're supposed to get on a daily basis? 40 grams, right, I have it, she's cheating. Okay, no, that's good. 40 grams, we're supposed to get 40 grams a day. How much does the average American usually get in their diet? 15, good, paying attention, good, 15 grams. How much fiber do you think our hunter-gatherer ancestors got a day? 120. Very good. Very good. That's right. So they were eating large amounts of plant fibers, right? So, and we know that from what we call fossilized coprolites, which is fossilized poo. So, okay. So these bacteria, these healthy bacteria in our guts, produce something called short-chain fatty acids. And short-chain fatty acids are an integral source of energy for the colonic epithelial cells. And one of the most important ones is butyrate. And butyrate it's got anti-carcinogenic properties, it's got anti-inflammatory properties, and it inhibits the growth and proliferation of tumor cell lines in vitro. So it's an important piece of colon cancer prevention. Okay, so you have to eat the macrobiotic accessible carbohydrates to get the bacteria to produce the butyrate to prevent the colon cancer. That's why fiber, right, is an important part of colon cancer prevention. And we know that a bacteroides enterotype is positively associated with colon cancer. And we know this because we see this in populations. So if you go look at a native African population that is primarily plant-based, not eating a lot of processed foods, not eating high animal food diets, they have a very low rate of colon cancer. It's about 1 case per 100,000 individuals. But African American populations are more like 65 per 100,000 individuals, 65 cases per 100,000 individuals. Okay? So it's not a genetic issue, it's an epigenetic issue, right? Butyrate also happens to upregulate a hormone called FIAF, which is the fasting-induced adipose factor. So when people go into states of fasting, if they're primarily Prevotella, have butyrate-producing bacteria, they have the upregulated FIAF, which then helps them lose weight, helps them burn adipose. And the differences in our microbiome can actually account for some of the reasons that we have a more obese populace now. So genetic variation only accounts for about 6 to 11% of the variation in BMI. It's actually more related to gut bacterial enterotype. So 23% of the population is characterized as having a low microbial diversity, which is associated with obesity and other chronic diseases. And these folks that have this lower diversity also have an increased risk of insulin resistance and dyslipidemia. And consuming fiber has the ability to change that, right? It increases the bacterial diversity and it changes the enterotype that's there. But fiber supplements don't, so that's an important thing to remember. Fiber supplements do not have the same impact. We also know that families share recipes, and they also share similar gut microbiomes. And so just living in a lean household can protect you against obesity. And we all know that if you have a friend that's obese or a family member that's obese, you're like 57% more likely to be obese yourself. But what we're actually starting to recognize is that it may not just be socially contagious. It may actually be infectious. Yeah. So be careful who you hang out with. Okay. The lack of short-chain fatty acid production like butyrate from dysbiosis can also cause other chronic diseases. So one example is that milk fat can complex with bile acids and produce hydrogen sulfide. And that is the hydrogen sulfide is a gas that smells like rotten eggs, right? We all know what that is. And it's been associated with inflammatory bowel disease. But fiber consumption can counteract this because because of the butyrate production, it can reduce the inflammation in the colon. Additionally, choline found in eggs and seafood and poultry, as well as carnitine found in red meat, can get converted to trimethylamine oxide in the gut by these bacteria. And trimethylamine oxide, are you familiar with this? This is the one that is associated with cardiovascular disease. It's proatherogenic. And it also is associated with fatty liver disease. But what we know is that if you give a vegan a steak, they cannot make TMAO. Okay? Now, if you feed them the steak for a few days, they will develop the bacteria in the gut that can make the TMAO. And then if they keep eating that red meat, then they will start to produce it. Okay? Antibiotics will also sometimes temporarily shut down that process, but it's not good to keep people on antibiotics long term. Better to just stop eating the red meat. And excess iron consumption can cause a gut dysbiosis as well that impacts, results in inflammation. And of course, we all like to talk about genetics, right? And how are these Crohn's disease, inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, and ulcerative colitis, is this a genetic problem? Well, what we know is that if you look at monozygotic twin concordance rates, for ulcerative colitis, it's only 6%, and for Crohn's disease, it's 58%. So this is, again, an epigenetic problem, primarily. I mean, we all have genetic predispositions for stuff, right? And without that genetic predisposition, it's not always possible to actually develop the disease. However, having the genetic predisposition does not inevitably lead to the disease process if you don't turn that gene on. And what we know is that this epigenetic mechanism is primarily driven by the microbiome. So what happens is that when you have sulfur-containing amino acids like methionine and cysteine in foods, and these are the foods that are where these things are found, they react with, they act as a substrate during a fermentation process in the gut that produces, again, this hydrogen sulfide gas. So sulfur-containing amino acid, so foods that are high in sulfur-containing amino acids, like meat, fish, eggs, cheese, tea, those kinds of things, can lead to this sulfidogenesis. But inorganic sulfate that are used as additives in things like apricot, like dried fruits, certain jams, and some of those kinds of things can also induce this problem. And it's also, wine is another one, because we add sulfites to wine to prevent bacterial growth. So that can cause that. But organic foods prohibit sulfide use in them. So hydrogen sulfide gas, so what does it do? So it induces an apoptosis in the mucosal lining, but it also causes mucosal ulceration. So this gas is really toxic. And we know that the American, or that traditional diets have more like the rural African diet, like a traditional plant-based diet, has about 2.7 millimoles a day of sulfides added into the diet, whereas in our culture it's more like 16 and a half, so significantly more. And sulfide gas is the main risk factor for relapse of ulcerative colitis. So if somebody is in remission, they did a study where they looked at ulcerative colitis patients that were in remission, and if they started consuming meat, they had a 3-fold increased risk of going into relapse. Processed meat was 5 times increased risk. Again, that's because of the addition of the extra sulfides for processing. And then alcohol risk increased by 2.7 times. There was also a study that was done. It was a prospective study, and it was 2 years. And they looked at Crohn's patients who had achieved clinical remission. And they gave 2 groups. They gave them a semi-vegetarian diet. So it had very small amounts of, very, very small amounts of animal products in it. And the patients who were in that semi-vegetarian diet group, 100% of them were in remission at a year, and 92% were in remission at 2 years. However, 6 of those individuals switched to an omnivorous diet, and 4 of them relapsed by the end of the 2nd year. So autism is another issue. We don't know if it's a chicken and an egg scenario, which came first. So we don't know if it's a gut dysbiosis that's leading to autism, or if autism is leading to a gut dysbiosis in terms of the microbial alterations. But we do know that there is a connection. So we know that there's a decreased bacterial diversity in the guts of children with autism. We also know that these kids oftentimes have increased Clostridia species in their guts. And the more Clostridia species that they have in their guts, there's a direct correlation to the level or the degree of their autistic behaviors. And again, autism is again on the rise. I talked a little bit about this, I think, in the last presentation that I gave, but there may also be an infectious component to this as well, right? So that if we have more disordered gut microbial situations, then those things get passed around socially. And the gut microbiome plays an interesting role in regressive autism in particular. So we have kids that are born and identified within the first few months of life as being autistic, but then we have kids that have regressive autism, and these kids develop normally until about 18 months of age and then regress. And one interesting case study that was made was with this young man. So he developed regressive autism after several courses of antibiotics for recurrent ear infections. And his mother had done some research, and she had gotten involved with a guy named Dr. Sidney Feingold, who is a professor emeritus of infectious disease at UCLA. And so they treated this kid with vancomycin, and he actually had, because of the Clostridia species that was in his gut, and he actually had been without any sort of language at all, but he was able to start to at least talk and put together some sentences. So he had some improvement. I mean, obviously didn't reverse his problem, but there was a significant improvement. And the Clostridia species that was invoked in this case was Desulfovibrio. And Desulfovibrio is a proteobacteria, but it makes sulfides, it makes sulfides out of sulfates. So it causes this hydrogen sulfide gas problem. And what he found in this study was that half of the children with regressive autism were colonized with Desulfovibrio, but none of the control children were. And Desulfovibrio also has a potent endotoxin that is better at inducing inflammation than even TNF-alpha secretion. And Desulfovibrio is found in meat, and cooked meat in particular. So again, here is a list of foods that are high in methionine, which is again one of those sulfate or sulfur-based amino acid foods. And so the hypothesis goes something like this. Okay, so people are being colonized with certain types of bacteria from the diet. The child is then exposed to an antibiotic, right, that kills, because we know from working in healthcare that as soon as you give a patient a course of antibiotics and they get diarrhea, what's the first thing you worry about? C. diff, right? Clostridia species. So we knock out the good stuff, the bad stuff overgrows, causes a hydrogen sulfide gas overgrowth, okay? And hydrogen sulfide gas is toxic not just to the colonic epithelium, but it's also very toxic to the central nervous system, okay? So then you're getting this impact on the central nervous system and the brain. So non-caloric artificial sweeteners, that's what NAS stands for. These things are also associated with obesity, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes. And they also can cause a gut dysbiosis, and that's probably actually how that's happening. We know that if you give somebody a 75-gram load of aspartame or sucralose or one of these artificial sweeteners, and you compare that to the response when you give them water, they actually have an insulin spike. So it causes insulin resistance. But what's interesting is that every molecule of this every molecule of these artificial sweeteners is converted to methanol. And methanol is converted 1-to-1 to formaldehyde. Okay, formaldehyde we know is a known carcinogen, right? And it causes inflammation in the gut, which results in both a dysbiosis, but it can actually result in an inflammatory bowel disease type situation. And so the dysbiosis then can result in the inflammatory bowel disease, the obesity, and the type 2 diabetes. But we know from case studies and from epidemiologic studies that as soon as we remove these things from the diet, the whole situation gets reversed. So it can be fixed pretty rapidly within a few weeks of discontinuing these non-caloric artificial sweeteners. And so what we know, and this is, again, this is not causation, this is correlation. Okay, so it's important to recognize that. But when Canada approved sucralose in 1991, they saw a doubling of their inflammatory bowel disease rates. In the US, after we approved it, we had a 21% increase in ulcerative colitis and 22% increase in Crohn's. Australia and Norway saw the same thing. And we also know that cooking with this stuff, when these things are treated at high temperatures, they're mutagenic. They create mutagenic chemicals, so we can't do that. China saw the same thing. So in 2008, when they when they approved sucralose, they had a 12-fold increase in inflammatory bowel disease. Over half of the U.S. population consumes these things, with sucralose being now the number one. So it's been replaced. Sucralose has replaced aspartame as the number one artificial sweetener. And it's improved in more than 80 countries. And now we're finding it in the water. We're finding it in surface water and rivers. And again, it's important to note that if we stop consuming these things, the gut dysbiosis does resolve. Okay. So our exposures, our bacterial exposures out in the environment are impacting our makeup of our gut microbiome, which can then cause other types of diseases. So one of the things I want to talk about is zoonosis. So transfer of bacteria, it can be bacteria or viruses or all sorts of things, from animals to humans. But in this particular case, we know that the urinary tract infections are largely a zoonotic infection coming from chicken. So what happens is that eating contaminated, and E. coli is the number one, okay? But eating the chicken is one thing. But even just handling the chicken without even consuming it, actually you can become colonized with this E. coli bacteria in the gut, and then these infections are ascending infections, so they're coming from the rectovaginal area and they're causing these urinary tract infections. The same is true with C. diff. So, we always think of C. diff as being a hospital-acquired infection or an iatrogenic infection, but C. diff only shows up after we've given people these antibiotics, right, or they become immunosuppressed. Well, where did they get it in the first place? Well, 42% of all of packaged meat products in this country are contaminated with C. diff. So we're getting it from the food supply, we're getting it from animals, and we're consuming it, we're becoming colonized with it, and then we're getting sick with it when we get antibiotics. Glyphosate. This is Roundup for all those of you who don't know. So this is the most commonly used pesticide in the United States. Or herbicide, I guess I should say. Pesticide. I guess plants are pests too, but anyway. Most commonly used pesticide in the United States. And it's been associated with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, right? We've heard about the class action lawsuits there. But there's been some discussion that it's also playing a role in obesity and type 2 diabetes and autism and all these other things. But again, it's primarily through a disruption of the gut. So what we know is that there was a study done of, oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah. It can, but it's ubiquitous now in the food supply, okay? It's ubiquitous in the food supply. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. But basically, what happens is that it appears that glyphosate may be related. So we all know what celiac disease is, right? Okay, but now we have this new thing called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, okay? So when I went to med school like eons ago, that wasn't a thing, but now it's a thing. So same with like fructose intolerance, that wasn't a thing, but now it's a thing because we have high fructose corn syrup in everything. So what's happening with this the theory, the hypothesis with this non-celiac gluten sensitivity is that glyphosate is actually disrupting, it's causing a gut dysbiosis, but then it's also disrupting the tight junctions in the gut, which then causes leaky gut, right? We all know what leaky gut is. And the reason that, that wheat is often implicated is because in this country, in other places too, we spray, so when the wheat grows, okay, and it's time to harvest it, in places where they have kind of a shorter growing season, they have to kill the wheat in order to get it to dry out so that they can harvest it. And the way that they do that is they spray Roundup all over it, okay? Then they harvest it, and then they grind it into grain, and then they feed it to us, okay? All right, so that's how that works. So we know that glyphosate, when it gets into the gut, it causes, it kills certain types of bacteria, so it'll kill lactobacillus, but Salmonella and Clostridium are resistant to it. So that's great. And we've seen this, and the reason that we have this idea that this is what's going on is that there was a study done on carnivorous fish that got exposed to glyphosate, and they got these fish get a celiac-like disease from the consumption of the glyphosate. And we're seeing it now in poultry and cattle and swine that are eating grains that are contaminated with it as well. And again, there's like debate. Okay, so is celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity, are these things just becoming more common because we're diagnosing them more, we have better diagnostic tools? That may be so. However, we also know that that there was a study done where they looked at frozen sera of people the samples were taken between 1948 and 1954, and they compared them to sera of contemporary people. And what we realized was that there was a fourfold increase in the rate of celiac disease in the contemporary cohort. So you're actually seeing more antibodies in contemporary people as compared to 70 years ago. And it's not just the case for gluten. The prevalence of allergic-related diseases, food intolerance, and chemical sensitivities in both the pediatric and adult populations has dramatically increased over the last 2 to 3 decades. And there's associated mortality and morbidity with this, of course. And I'm guessing that you are recognizing this in your practices, that you're seeing this. Did somebody say corn? That one of the things is corn. So the pediatricians that I used to work with talked about seeing children with corn intolerances, which they had never seen before. Oops. There we go. Okay, so then we say, okay, well, let's just all avoid gluten. Well, okay, first of all, that's hard. And second of all, it's not necessarily what we should be doing because we all know that whole grains have a lot of benefits. So we know that they're associated with a reduced risk of disease, particularly cardiovascular disease. They're high in fiber again, so they promote healthy bowels, help control blood sugar. The fiber helps control blood sugar. helps manage weight, all of these various things. So we have to be careful about just saying, well, we're all just going to go gluten-free. The other thing is that, gluten-free products, it can be an economic burden for patients. These things are not necessarily always readily available, and they tend to be way more expensive than, the traditional varieties of things. Okay, so, I should have changed the color of that, shouldn't I? Okay, so what this says is that, so basically, there's a lot of potential for dietary-based therapeutic treatments for various things. So what we know is that, like the MACs, the macrobiotic accessible carbohydrates, are good to eat. Yogurts, especially plant-based yogurts, Kite Hill has one that's almond-based and has, all of the cultures, and they have the live cultures in it and those kinds of things. Probiotics, whole plant foods, those things are good. But we have this tendency to believe that certain things are a panacea. So like fermented foods now are all the rage. So for instance, kombucha, right? Everyone wants to drink kombucha. The problem is that it's been associated with some life-threatening lactic acidosis, so that's maybe not necessarily something we should be recommending for people. Kimchi, which is a fermented cabbage, and vegetables that is eaten primarily in Asian countries, particularly Korea. This has been associated with, in epidemiologic studies, it's been shown to being associated with an increased risk of both breast and prostate cancer. So those things are there. And again, fiber supplements don't do the same. Fiber supplements does not equal eating fiber. So again, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? Okay. And that's all I have. So my next slide is just references. So all that stuff. Okay. So I'm happy now to take questions. Yeah, so there's two sweeteners that have, so stevia is like a plus or minus, but the two sweeteners, the two non-caloric artificial sweeteners that have been identified as being safe are erythritol, which is a corn alcohol sugar sweetener, but it's actually got some anti-inflammatory properties, and it doesn't tend to cause the insulin resistance that we see. So erythritol, and the other one is called Yacon syrup. And Yacon is a root, a tuber, and you can you can get a sweetener out of it. I have some. I like to try these things just, and tell people about them. It tastes pretty good, but it's super expensive. So Yacon. Yeah. What's that? I don't know. I can't tell you. I haven't heard anything about it one way or another. Yeah. 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 So if you cook potatoes or rice and you cool them, and then you reheat them, they tend to have more resistant starch in them. So that's another way to make that starch more resistant as well. Thank you. What else? No burning questions? It really is. We continue to eat wheat. We don't have, theoretically, if you're buying organic whole wheat products, that should help, but we don't know. We don't have any data to say that actually it makes a difference. But
so similar to that question, is there a threshold? It should be too much or enough that it makes a difference, or under that will be okay?
Right. So if there is a threshold, we don't know what it is, and it's probably individual. So fructose intolerance is a great example of that. So fructose intolerance, every human being has a threshold beyond which, if they consume more fructose than what their limit is, they will get symptoms. And some people have lower thresholds than others. And you know, the range for fructose is 25 to 50 grams a day. Now, the fact that we have people exceeding 50 grams of fructose on a daily basis is kind of frightening, but we do, because high fructose corn syrup is in everything. Again, glyphosate is difficult to get that kind of a threshold, because we don't know in any given sample of wheat flour how much is in that wheat flour, right? I mean, it depends on where it was grown and how it was harvested. So it's really hard to say. So we don't really have any good data on that, unfortunately.
Have they looked at studies of other countries, like European countries, where there's lots of pastas, there's lots of wheat in their ingredients? Do they see the
Same things.
problems that we found that it's allowed there?
Right. It's right. Yeah. So no. So they're not having the same kinds of. I mean, most countries aren't having the same kinds of disease problems that we're having in general. Now, certainly they're catching up to us in terms of diabetes. You know, we're exporting all sorts of things, right? And so, I mean, we essentially know where this is all coming from. We know the source. It's just a matter of, you know, the places that have prevent it from, and their dietary patterns are different too. I mean, we consume a lot more highly refined carbohydrates than other places, like other European countries. You know, I mean, that's part of it too. So, I don't know, that probably wasn't a very satisfactory answer, but.
No, I wonder what their research on these things. I mean, I assume that they are struggling with the same things that we are, or at least in the same number.
Not to the same degree, right, right.
But just comparatively.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, we have numbers for the inflammatory bowel disease, but as far as non-celiac gluten sensitivity and those kinds of things go, everything that I've seen is all U.S.-based data. Yeah.
So do you advocate doing like time-restricted eating or fasting?
Yeah. So. Intermittent fasting has been shown to. So I was at the PPOD conference, which is the Plant-Based Prevention of Disease conference. It was in Raleigh. It's going to be in Michigan next year, and I would say that if anybody is interested, like, that was a great conference. I went as a speaker, but I got to listen to all sorts of interesting people talk. But this one lady, she's a PhD in, I don't know what her PhD is in, but she talked about sleep and fasting and how that impacts things. So intermittent fasting, so not eating after about 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and then fasting for more than 12 hours, does have a positive impact on the metabolism. We also know that eating, the ideal thing seems to be eating about 2 meals a day, around 10 a.m. and about 4 or 5 p.m. But 3 meals a day is okay. So 2 to 3 meals is best. But giving yourself a window of time in between those meals, not snacking throughout the day is not a good thing. Really sticking to those individual meals. So yeah, so intermittent fasting is definitely beneficial. And that's the other thing too, is I forgot to mention that stress, not sleeping enough, other environmental triggers will impact the gut microbiome. And we know that going out into nature and being exposed to nature and the sun and all those things has a positive impact on your microbiome. So we know it has a positive impact on our mental health, but it appears to be modulated through the microbiome. So. Uh-huh. Well, did you want to say something? No. Oh, yeah. I mean, when bacteria are everywhere, right? So, we shed bacteria all of the time. So, hand washing and those kinds of things does reduce the amount of bacteria that, we spread from person to person. But ultimately, if you're living in a household with people, you are sharing their, you're swapping spit with them, right? I mean, you're sharing their stuff. So it's everywhere. Yeah.
Going off of that, is there any studies or any evidence, say husband and wife live together, she's vegetarian, does she get, can she not lose the microbiome?
Yeah.
What comes from the meat that the husband eats?
That's a great question. I don't think we know. I mean, we know that if you live in a household that's lean, your chances of being lean are better. Now, if you live in a household where there's obesity, your are better that you're going to be obese. We haven't done any studies where we've looked at that specifically, but that would be an interesting thing to do, is to say, okay, let's put the husband and the wife in hotel rooms and not let them see each other for 2 weeks, and then see what their gut microbiomes are, and then let's put them back together and then see how they change, without changing their diets. That would be a fascinating study. So get on that. Okay. Yeah, I think there was, and that's an interesting thing too, because we know that if you're putting that stuff directly into people, then that's what you're going to get. They used to joke when I worked at the hospital. They were like, "Oh, you should be our fecal transplant donor because you have the healthiest gut bacteria here." And I was like, "Okay," but yes, that is true, and they have also looked at butyrate, doing fecal butyrate transplants, or intrarectal butyrate infusions, I should say, for inflammatory bowel disease. And it works pretty well. But it's like, well, just feed them some fiber instead. Like, let's not be crazy. Oh, did you have a question?
Yeah. Could you go over the positives and negatives of the stevia?
I cannot. I would have to go. I'm not. I'd have to go back and look at all of that. But yeah, I'm sorry. No, because you're not altering the fiber. You're just removing the water. So hydrating food is actually a pretty good way to preserve it, as long as you're not adding a bunch of sulfides to it to keep it, the same color and doing those kinds of things. But no, you're not altering the fiber and those other MACs that are in there. So that's okay. Yeah.
So if you take a fiber supplement, is it really not doing anything?
Yeah, it's just a waste of money. Yeah.
So you're saying she uses probiotics from plant-based yogurt types and not supplements?
Oh, okay, so I didn't mention this either. Probiotic supplements have shown to be beneficial in certain cases. So we know that if patients have like antibiotic-associated diarrhea, that does tend to help. A probiotic supplement does tend to help. We know that athletes who use probiotics because athletes who work really hard have a reduction in their IgA in their gut, and so they are more predisposed to developing, getting viruses and getting colds and that kind of stuff. And probiotics do tend to help reduce their chances of getting those things. The only problem with probiotics is that the products that are produced, there's no real great guarantee that what you're getting is what you think you're getting, right? I mean, the numbers of live bacteria are varied, the actual strains of bacteria are varied. So probiotics are either helpful to harmless, in somewhere in there. So certainly, I mean, I've used probiotics with patients before. I think that they can be beneficial. But just to take one on a daily basis, that's probably a waste of time. Yeah. Unless you're training for a marathon, and you don't want to get a cold or whatever. But good. Anything else? Yeah. The glyphosate stuff specifically, or? No. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, there are good people out there, working on things. As far as government-funded research into this area, not so much. I mean, in the agricultural world, they just went from glyphosate to now approving dicamba, which is even worse. So now dicamba is being used pretty regularly on GMO crops. I mean, there are groups that are trying to change the way that we farm in this country, which I think are going to have more impact than perhaps, research into. I mean, we pretty well know that this stuff isn't good for us. It's just how do we actually apply what we know into making actual change in the systems that we harbor. So, we have. So one of the things that I do. So I'm at Doane, and I do. I have online courses in lifestyle medicine for people who are interested in seeking board certification in lifestyle medicine. So if you're a board certified physician, or if you're a nurse practitioner or a PA, or even a PhD level healthcare provider in some fashion, you can now sit for the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine and get board certified. So we offer training courses in that. But my other job is that I am the director of the Institute for Human and Planetary Health. So what we're trying to do through the Institute is help people recognize that there are these intimate connections between the planet, the health of our planet, and the health of the human species. And so, climate change and environmental degradation are impacting our health in a myriad numbers of ways, and are going to continue to do so. But our own lifestyle behaviors impact our health, and our own lifestyle behaviors are impacting climate change and environmental degradation. So the way we feed ourselves is a huge driver of greenhouse gas emissions and environmental degradation through the use of these chemicals and synthetic fertilizers. So we have to start thinking, as medical providers, I believe, we have to start thinking differently about how we care for patients. And it includes bringing these planetary health perspectives into what we're doing. So in November, we have a conference that we're holding. It's a symposium. We're going to have some speakers on health, economic systems, agricultural systems, food systems, water systems, health systems, and how we can start to leverage change in those systems in order to start to impact the health of our communities. Because, we are just, someone has turned on the faucet and has plugged the sink, right? And it's overflowing, and we're just sitting there trying to mop up the floor, and it's not working. So we got to figure out how to turn off the faucet. And so that's really what my work is focused on. So if you're interested in, if you are interested in hearing more about the symposium, or you're interested in attending, please let me know afterwards, and we can talk more about it. But yeah, these are wicked problems, right? These are really wicked problems. So again, yes, yes. And the October conference, Healthy for a Lifetime, right? Yes, Healthy for a Lifetime. It's here. It's in Omaha. It's in October. There are some flyers out on the desk, and I'll be there. Dr. Esselstyn will be there. Dr. Campbell will be there. So a lot of good folks. So it should be interesting.